everyone, Meltyman234 here, and welcome to another episode of Forgotten Media, where I dig up some stuff you may or may not have heard of. Today, we'll be looking at a handful of video game consoles that were never completed, and boy, this one's gonna be a real doozy. First up's the Atari 2700. This was a system that was planned to be released in 1981. This is going to be the next system after the Atari 2600, and it would feature wireless controllers, and the designs were smooth and fluent. The only downside is that the remotes were very sensitive, that they can work at over a radius of 1,000 feet. This would mean it would affect other Atari 2700 systems, as well as other remote control devices like TV remotes and garage doors. They tried fixing the problem, making the controls bulky and hard to control to fix it, but it just didn't make the cut. The design of the system would later be used for the Atari 5200. Next up is the Atari 5100, or the Atari 5200 Junior. This is going to be a smaller port of the Atari 5200, as some of us know how big that thing is. It had the usual design and such. The only difference is that the little slot that keeps the controllers is gone, and it uses a standard TV switch box instead of the 4-port automatic switch box thingy. I'm not sure if the system might have helped iron out all the bugs the controllers had, but since the Atari 5200 wasn't received that well, its junior port never hit the shelves in stores. Next up's the Atari Cosmos. Work on the system started in 1978. The system was made to look something like an old mini arcade machine where they placed two holographic images over an LED screen to give it a 3D image, and the system would run on an AC adapter instead of batteries. 9 games were planned for the system, such as Asteroids, Basketball, Dodge'em, Football, Outlaw, Roadrunner, Sea Battle, Space Invaders, and Superman. The system was displayed at a New York toy fair in 1981. It wasn't received well. Even though the system was a package and ready for shipping to go to stores and such, Atari pretty much pulled the plug and canceled the whole thing entirely, as they thought it was too much of a risk to release it after the criticism they got. Only 5 prototypes are known to exist and are extremely rare. Next up is the Atari Game Brain. This was a unreleased dedicated video game console that was planned to be released in 1977. The system was known for 10 games, most of them being based off of Pong. The system was intended to clear out the CPUs in the other unsold consoles, but when a prototype was already in progress, dedicated consoles were already becoming obsolete against the programmable ROMs that were made, and so the console was scrapped. Only 3 Game Brain consoles and 5 prototype cartridges are known to exist. Next up is the Atari Panther. This is going to be a 32-bit system that was scheduled to be released in 1991. The system would have 3 chips, a Motorola 68000 running it, a sound processor called Otis, 32 sound channels displaying 8,192 colors from an 8-bit palette of 262,144 colors, and supports 65,535 sprites of any size simulator. Quite a lot of numbers, ain't it? So far, there has been 3 games that were planned for the system: Crescent Galaxy, Radian, and Cybermorph. These games were later moved to the Jaguar. The system was scrapped as Atari decided to focus their attention on the Atari Jaguar. And speaking of the Jaguar, Atari had plans of making a sequel to the system called the Atari Jaguar 2. There's not much information as its unfinished hardware is all that exists. Judging by the looks of it, it looked like it would have its own line of games and might work on Jaguar games. I'm not sure if it was going to work on the Jaguar CD, but I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't, since that system never works. Another Jaguar system that was cancelled was the Atari Jaguar Duo. This weird machine was a dual system playing both Jaguar and Jaguar CD games instead of the add-ons. Since the Jaguar CD failed, the Duo was never released. It's a bit of a shame, really, since the system combined 2 different Jaguar games. They might have ironed out all of the bugs that the CD add-on had. Next up is the Sega Neptune. This was going to be a 2-in-1 system that was planned to be released in 1994 and 1995, going up for $200. Since the 32X failed so miserably, Sega decided to make a system that would play Genesis and 32X games without the confusing cables and connectors and such. If you'd watch my Cancelled Sonic Games video, you'll notice the page I used for the Sonic Sports has a small advertisement for the Neptune, so they were pretty advertising it very small. But when a prototype was already finished, Sega was ready to release the Sega Saturn, and they decided to scrap the Neptune as they felt not many people would be interested. Several prototypes exist, and so far, there is at least one that actually works. Next up's the Sega VR. This was going to be a fancy add-on that was announced in 1991. It is very similar to the Virtual Boy and the Sega 3D glasses. Since it only got to the prototype stage, it was last seen at a computer show in 1993 and was never mentioned again in 1994. Sega cancelled the system as they felt that the system was so real, people would move around and damage themselves and have headaches and such while using the thing. Next up is the Super NES CD add-on. Not much to talk about it since it was going to be an add-on to the Super NES with its own line of games. The story behind it, or at least what I've heard, is that Nintendo and Philips had plans for a CD add-on for the Super NES, and it never made it. Philips later took the idea and did it themselves, and the CDI was born. Also, Sony tried to do the same thing with Nintendo, and it wasn't made, and so Sony went on their own in creating the PlayStation. Next up's the Action Game Master. Probably the weirdest console I've ever seen. It looks like somebody took two PlayStation controllers, connected them to a football, then glued an iPod on top of it. The system was made by Active Enterprise, a company who makes unlicensed video games like the dreaded horrors of Action 52 and Cheetah 2. The Action Game Master was planned to be able to play NES, Super NES, Genesis, and PC games through the use of an adapter or some sort. The system would have its own line of games that one of them was announced was Cheetah 3. But since Active pretty much stopped making stuff in 1994, it was never finished. A few reasons why the console was never completed, let alone worked on, was that it was too bulky and would be extremely expensive, going up for $500. Next up's the Magnavox Odyssey 3. This was going to be a system that would have a real mechanical keyboard and built-in joystick hold for the dual joysticks. It was displayed at a Consumer Electronics Show in 1983, and since the video game crash was already in effect, it's no surprise that it never released and only a few prototypes exist. Next up is the Ultravision Arcade system. This was a computer console that was announced in 1983. The slogan for the system was, "It's a game, a computer, a color TV." Yeah, had it all, didn't it? It would have had the standard 10 color in the games and controlled by 16 directional joysticks with 2 buttons. And the system was portable as it would run on AC or DC power. It would have its own line of games, but it would also support the ColecoVision and Atari 2600 games. The system was very expensive, as it was $999, and since it was announced during the video game crash of 1983, it's no surprise that it was never completed. Next up is the Tattoo Wow Wow. Pretty weird name for a console, ain't it? It was made to play ports of Tattoo arcade games as well as download games from satellite transmissions. The console was presented at a Tokyo Game Show in 1992 and was never seen again after that. Reasons for its cancellation are unknown. Next up, the Nano Gear. This was an interesting concept as it was a handheld that could play PC games and create your own games. Even though this was planned in 2003, it never made it off the drawing board, probably because the technology wasn't that advanced yet. Next up is the Extreme Game Player. This was a handheld system that was announced in 2005 and 2006, and was intended to be a follow-up to the Game Park 32. There were 3 versions. One was the standard type, one was a smaller version known as the XGP Mini, and the other was the XGP Kids, which was very similar to the Game Park 32. But since the company announced bankruptcy in 2007, the consoles were never made. Next up is the L600, made by a company called Injima, or whatever you pronounce that name, that was founded by John Gildred in 2000 and was shut down in April of 2001. The L600 was a computer console that could play CD player, DVD player, web browser, have a MP3 storage device, and a video recorder. It was pretty interesting, but since the release date of the system was during the time the Xbox, PlayStation 2, and GameCube were already in competition, it got scrapped. I'm sure they canceled the L600 because they felt it would just be pushed aside by the other 3 consoles that were already released. Next up is the Ape Extreme, made by Apex Digital. The system was going to be something like a personal gaming console with a keyboard, mouse, game controller, and a remote control. It would have a database called Drop and Play, the ability to store computer games on a hard drive, and play DVDs, VCD, audio CDs, MP3s, slideshows, and internet radio. It was displayed at a Consumer Electronics Show in January of 2004, and the company canceled the idea near the end of that year. Next up is the Connex Multi-System, that was planned to be released in winter of 1990. This was a video game system developed by Connex and Flare, and was intended to make the multi-system 16-bit with other interesting features. The console itself was like those fancy add-on steering wheels on certain consoles. Things weren't going too well with the system as the company faced many problems when Connex ran out of cash to release the system. I wouldn't be surprised if there are a few prototypes that exist. Next is the Panasonic Mark II, made by the same company who made the 3DO. Through certain prototypes, it was declared more powerful than the Nintendo 64. Of course, the Dreamcast would top all of them. Since the system had a long load time, there were only 5 games made for it. The system was cancelled in 1997 as the company didn't want to compete against the PlayStation. Next is the Phantom, an interesting console that was requested by SonicFan14. The system was supposedly going to be a console capable of playing any PC game from the past or future. It was seen in action at a Electronic Entertainment Expo in 2004. During development, the Phantom was delayed so much as the company was already working on the Phantom Lapboard, so after a while, I think they canceled the project in 2006 and decided to focus more on the Lapboard. And finally, we have a video game console named Jungle. This was Panasonic's first attempt at a handheld console that was announced in October of 2010. It was able to play online games on the go, and the games that were announced were Stellar Dawn, RuneScape, and Battlestar Galactica Online. The system was going to be released in mid-2011, but Panasonic canceled the system in March of 2011 due to changes in the market. Well, there you have it. After all that hard work on certain systems that were cool, interesting, or just plain random, it's a bit of a shame that most of them were never completed. Well, that wraps up this episode of Forgotten Media, so this is Melting Man 234 signing out.